Rural Americans deserve access to the best of what our nation has to offer, especially health care. Across every state and every community, America's rural hospitals are the first line of defense, protecting our families, neighbors, and loved ones. No matter where you live, hospital care doesn't clock out. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Each year, America's over 5,000 hospitals care for millions of patients, providing 24/7 emergency care, delivering babies, cancer treatments, and other life-saving care that patients rely on. Behind every one of those patients are doctors, nurses, and caregivers working tirelessly to keep people healthy and safe. Hospitals are our community's lifelines. They employ our neighbors and keep our families healthy. But now, some in Congress are threatening access to care. Tell Congress, protect patient care to keep America strong. Don't cut rural health care.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Roger Stone Show. Joining me now is David Schoen. David Schoen very ably represented President Donald Trump in the first of his impeachment trials. David Schoen is a noted civil rights, ballot access, and criminal defense attorney, although he handles complicated civil and criminal matters before both trial and appellate courts. He's also literally the smartest lawyer I know, because David Schoen is one of the very, very few lawyers who understands that everything happens impacting a given little case doesn't necessarily happen in the courtroom or in the documents in this case, and that the exterior factors, such as publicity and media coverage, affect a trial. Many lawyers don't recognize that. David, I want to get your takeaway off the top on the Supreme Court decision, which killed the tariff program under which President Donald Trump has brought more than $158 billion into America. What does it mean, and where do we go from here?
Thanks very much for having me on. Look, I happen to think the decision is wrong. I happen to think the dissenters have the better arguments here, but it is the decision. I don't happen to think it's going to create any kind of catastrophe. I think that any and all tariffs will be replaced under several other legislative provisions, if the president so desires. And putting aside all of the political questions, whether tariffs are advisable or not, we have now an extraordinary economy. All of the horrors that were predicted by the commentators from tariffs haven't come true. We have a stock market at record levels. And interestingly, the stock market didn't react radically to this decision that just came down. So let me just give you in a nutshell. I'm sure, I know you know, Roger, but maybe some of the listeners don't. This is a particular statutory regimen that the president decided to impose tariffs under. It's called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or the IEEPA. And it authorizes the president to take action when there's an international emergency. In this case, the president said that we have an emergency for illegal drugs coming into the country from Canada, Mexico, and China, and we have large and persistent trade deficits. And then he elaborated on those things. Therefore, he believed that he had the authority to impose tariffs. I also believe that he did under this statute, but the court has said no. So let me just say where we go from here. The president immediately put out a statement imposing tariffs under other authority, Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, and so on. But I think the overall story here is that tariffs will be permitted under any one or all of four separate acts. I'll give them to you in a nutshell. Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974 allows the president to impose tariffs up to 15% for 150 days. After that, Congress has to pass on it. Section 232, Trade Expansion Act of 1962. The president can pick out sectors to impose tariffs on, and he has done that. Cars, car parts, heavy equipment, that sort of thing. Those tariffs remain in effect, and they will remain in effect. Under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, U.S. trade representatives can investigate and take action against unfair foreign trade practices. That will happen. And Section 338 of the Tariff Act of 1930 gives the president the authority to raise tariffs up to 50% of a product's value after the U.S. International Trade Commission takes a look at it. I think Section 301 provides the most ripe area, but I think it's going to have no practical impact. The one remaining question, though, it seems to me, is one that was raised by Justice Kavanaugh in dissent. That's an important question. That is, if these tariffs were imposed without authority, is the consequence that they have to be repaid? I think the answer to that, first of all, it's going to be litigated, but secondly, has to be resoundingly no. Remember, these countries that had tariffs imposed passed along those costs to their citizens, their countries, and so on. We can't unravel all of that. The tariffs were engaged in with a belief that there was authority for them. Contracts were made accordingly, and I think it's absolute, for a number of reasons, absolutely cannot be undone with refunds given. That's it. That's all I have to say about it, I think.
I want to shift gears on you a little bit. The president, on his way to the greatest comeback in American political history, was the target of unprecedented lawfare in both federally, in New York State. We now know the extra-constitutional actions of Jack Smith. But in New York State particularly, the case I still find that they're all outrageous. The case, the values case, in which Mar-a-Lago was valued at $18 million, a case with no jury but a hateful, biased judge, which was overturned, and now that's on appeal. The E. Jean Carroll case, that was dreamed up by the lawyer George Conway. They actually went and changed New York state law. They got the Democrats in Albany to change New York state law to extend the statute of limitations for certain sex-alleged crimes in order to try to set Donald Trump up with a highly credible woman, E. Jean Carroll. Trump denies having sexually assaulted her. In fact, he denies having ever met her. She says that's defamatory, and she wins a massive judgment. Little did they know, by the way, when they passed that law, that they would also capture former Governor Andrew Cuomo and Mayor Eric Adams in similar sex assault-related lawsuits. And then, of course, there's the Alvin Bragg case, the so-called hush money case. David, how are these are all on appeal. How are all of these cases, how will they be resolved? How are they going?
A very good question. I'm glad you asked, because I've been, as most Americans, I think, very disturbed by these cases since they were initiated. Let me start with the last one you mentioned, case in front of this Judge Merchant, who I've been in front of before. I found to be someone completely unsuited to be a judge, in my view, both in temperament and wisdom. I don't think he knows the law. I don't think he properly researches it. And I don't think he's fair. I think he had a political agenda. In this case, we know that his daughter, the major fundraiser for Democratic candidates, he should have recused himself. And the lawyers in the case should have pursued the recusal issue much more sharply and on additional grounds, including a ground that this judge was handpicked by the chief administrative judge, we believe, with the influence of the district attorney's office. And there's a line of case law in which there was a long-standing practice in that court of the district attorney handpicking judges that a federal court has said, if it were raised directly from the trial court and on appeal, could well be subject to being overturned. I don't believe that issue was properly raised. But anyway, here's the status of the case. One of the arguments they're making is that this case should have been brought in federal court and must now be transferred to federal court because, based on the immunity decision, evidence that transpired or allegedly transpired while President Trump was president was put before the grand jury and alluded to at trial. Therefore, he should have immunity. The case should go to federal court. That argument is pending before Judge Alvin Hellerstein in the Southern District of New York. He has rejected once before sending the case to federal court. But as you know, the president was convicted on 34 counts, none of which, in my view, should have been convictions.
This is the so-called hush money. This is a so-called hush money case.
That's right. That's the hush money case. And with all due respect to the lawyers, this isn't Monday morning quarterbacking, because I said this at the time of the case. They made a number of mistakes, but those mistakes included the absolutely failure to properly use Robert Costello in the case. Costello appeared, a well-known lawyer, former deputy chief of the criminal division of the U.S. Attorney's Office, Southern District of New York, and at one point he represented Michael Cohen, the president's former confidant. When he represented Cohen, Cohen said clearly that the president did not know anything about what was going on here, that he, Michael Cohen, handled everything with this Stormy Daniels and so on. And he did so at a time when he had every incentive to implicate the president in making a deal for himself in the Southern District of New York. These lawyers absolutely blew it, the defense lawyers, when it came to using Robert Costello. They made a farce out of it. They never told him that the judge had limited what he could testify to, so he went into areas that had already been ruled off limits, and they never rescued him from it. So that was a terrible mistake. But the bottom line of the case is it has to be reversed, whichever court hears it, not just on the immunity grounds, but the primary issue is, this is a case in which, remember, it only became a felony by showing that he committed the misdemeanor of doctoring records for the purpose of committing another crime. The jury in that case was never instructed on what other crime they had to consider. They never returned a finding of what other crime it is they claim he doctored the books to commit. Absolutely has to be reversed. I'll go next to the Trump organization case, in which the fine imposed rose to a level of $600+ million and so on. Completely outrageous from the start. In this case, as you noted, has been reversed by the appellate division in the New York State system. It was reversed because they said the damages were excessive. I thought there was another primary issue that should have been raised in the case. First of all, it should have led to a jury trial. There was no jury trial in the case because the prosecution was based on what's known as Executive Law 6312 in New York State. That's an equitable remedy as opposed to a legal remedy. An equitable remedy means the court can impose requirements of conduct on the party being sued. And that, for example, Letitia James brought this case against the Trump organization. If she were to prevail, then equitable relief would be declaring how they can do business, whether they can do business. But in this case, they imposed damages of $500 million or so. The only cases that have said you don't get a jury trial in this case says you don't get a jury trial because it's equitable relief, not damages. If it's damages relief, you must have a jury trial. This was clearly the tail wagging the dog. In this case, damages was the overriding factor in the case, extraordinary damages. I'm worried about this case for one reason, additional reason. There's a case coming through the federal court system now in which the United States just granted certiorari. It's called SWIFT-TEC. In that case, it's a very similar issue. There's a federal statute at issue. It calls for the disgorgement of ill-gotten gains. And like in this case, 6312 that the president was prosecuted under, disgorgement could be a remedy if you find that there was a victim and harm done. In the president's case, the banks testified they were happy as a pig in mud to get his loans. They made money off of the loans. There was no loss, no harm, no victims. In the federal case coming up, same thing. No harm, no loss, no victims, but they've allowed a fine to be imposed, disgorgement. The Solicitor General has taken the position in that case that the government agreed certiorari should be granted, but that the statute should be upheld to allow disgorgement when there are no victims, no loss, and no harm. I'm afraid that's going to come back to bite them in the Trump case, and I would urge them in the strongest terms possible to rethink their position in the federal case and be consistent with the state court case and say, where, like in the Trump case, there's no victim, no loss, no damages, no harm, you cannot impose a fine, excessive or otherwise.
We're talking to lawyer David Schoen. When we come back, I'm going to ask him about the E. Jean Carroll case, the part of the cavalcade of lawfare against President Donald Trump in New York State before his triumphant return to the White House. Those cases, unfortunately, don't just go away. One of them he has won on and is now on appeal by the government. The other two are still on appeal. But I want to ask David Schoen lastly about the E. Jean Carroll case, and then I'll talk about some other issues. We're talking David Schoen. We've only got a limited amount of time. Literally the smartest lawyer I know, truly brilliant, not a Republican, not necessarily a conservative, but a strong supporter of the state of Israel, and someone who's fought long and hard against Islamic terrorism, as well as a civil rights lawyer who has represented minor parties and others with important issues of ballot access, which is thankless but important work. We'll be right back with David Schoen.
Rural Americans deserve access to the best of what our nation has to offer, especially healthcare. Across every state and every community, America's rural hospitals are the first line of defense, protecting our families, neighbors, and loved ones. No matter where you live, hospital care doesn't clock out. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Each year, America's over 5,000 hospitals care for millions of patients, providing 24/7 emergency care, delivering babies, cancer treatments, and other life-saving care that patients rely on. Behind every one of those patients are doctors, nurses, and caregivers working tirelessly to keep people healthy and safe. Hospitals are our community's lifelines. They employ our neighbors and keep our families healthy. But now, some in Congress are threatening access to care. Tell Congress, protect patient care to keep America strong. Don't cut rural health care.
Rural Americans deserve access to the best our nation has to offer, especially when it comes to health care. Across every state and every community, America's rural hospitals are the first line of defense, protecting our families, neighbors, and loved ones. No matter where you live, hospital care doesn't clock out. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Each year, America's over 5,000 hospitals care for millions of patients, providing 24/7 emergency care, delivering babies, cancer treatments, and other life-saving care that patients rely on. Behind every one of those patients are doctors, nurses, and caregivers working tirelessly to keep people healthy and safe. Hospitals are our community's lifelines. They employ our neighbors and keep our families' health. But now, some in Congress are threatening access to care. Tell Congress, protect patient care to keep America strong. Don't cut rural health care. Rural Americans deserve access to the best our nation has to offer, especially when it comes to health care. Across every state and every community, America's rural hospitals are the first line of defense, protecting our families, neighbors, and loved ones. No matter where you live, hospital care doesn't clock out. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Each year, America's over 5,000 hospitals care for millions of patients, providing 24/7 emergency care, delivering babies, cancer treatments, and other life-saving care that patients rely on. Behind every one of those patients are doctors, nurses, and caregivers working tirelessly to keep people healthy and safe. Hospitals are our community's lifelines. They employ our neighbors and keep our families' health. But now, some in Congress are threatening access to care. Tell Congress, protect patient care to keep America strong. Don't cut rural health care.
I didn't think the pain from the shingles rash would affect simple, everyday tasks like bathing, getting dressed, or even walking around. I was wrong. Though not everyone at risk will develop it, 99% of people over the age of 50 already have the virus that causes shingles, and it could reactivate at any time. I developed it, and the blistering rash lasted for weeks. Don't learn the hard way, like I did. Talk to your doctor or pharmacist today. Sponsored by GSK.
We're talking to noted attorney David Schoen. David, I was going to ask you about the E. Jean Carroll case, but I think I'm going to save that for another day because there's a much more important case. You have advocated for a pardon for two New Yorkers currently incarcerated, both of them in very poor health, both in their 90s, Michael Sessa and Vic Orena. You've advocated a pardon, but your argument why these men were convicted of a crime, a murder, in fact, that the government not only knew that they didn't commit, but knew was a murder that had been blessed by corrupt prosecutor Andrew Weissman. Tell us about this case.
It's the best example of corruption in the Department of Justice in the history of the department. I've said that many times. It's absolutely true. The case involved a corrupt FBI agent named Linda Vecchio who was working with a faction of a mafia family. He was finally caught when another agent heard him slam his fist down the desk after a murder and said, yes, we're going to win this thing. They employed the underboss of the mafia family to commit murders and to be an informant and so on. They withheld evidence, but a central part of this case is most important is it was prosecuted by Andrew Weissman. Andrew Weissman ought to be known by many of your listeners as the person who was Mueller's right-hand man, never should have been on that commission, so-called investigating President Trump. In the Eastern District of New York, well-known lawyer Jerry Shargell referred to him as the pathological liar after the Saturday Night Live figure. These two men have served over 33 years in prison. After their conviction in other related prosecutions, the evidence that Weissman had withheld was put before the jury, and 48 different jurors heard it in 4 different trials and issued acquittals in those cases. These two have never gotten a fair hearing. They both deserve to be pardoned. As you say, Vic Oreen is in his 90s. Michael Sess is in his late 60s. Their lives have been lost, but now they must be returned to their families. And it sends an important message about stamping out corruption in the Department of Justice and exactly what Andrew Weissman is and what he did in this case. He didn't act alone. He was a primary actor. And when he was called on it by another prosecutor on the team, he said, we have no obligation to turn over this evidence of corruption. We now have a confidential informant, top echelon confidential informant, who came forward and said he was given license to commit 12 murders by this prosecution team, by the agent, with the knowledge of the prosecutor. It's absolutely outrageous. They had to change the guidelines in the Department of Justice for how informants are used after this case was heard. So I'm hoping that the president will give clemency to these two, at least release them from prison. They should be pardoned, but in any event, release them from prison forever.
Commutation would certainly be fair. Look, this is a textbook for Andrew Weissman. He is the lawyer who destroyed a major corporation and their accountant. He is who's the architect of the Russia collusion hoax. Andrew Weissman knew back when he was the general counsel to the FBI that the Steele dossier was a contrivance, that it was a fabrication, originally paid for, I believe, by Paul Singer, a supporter of Marco Rubio, and then resold by GPS Fusion to Hillary Clinton's campaign. So the predicate for the Mueller investigation, the predicate for the FISA warrants. No, FBI Director James Comey didn't have a, quote, rich mosaic of evidence. They relied solely on the totally fugazi Steele dossier, which was a report that claimed that Trump had dallied with prostitutes in Moscow when visiting as a private businessman, completely bogus, and the false claim that the Democrat National Committee had been the target of an online hack. David Schoen has been an active commentator. You can see him on Fox, you can see him on CNN, always in the mix, and literally a man who sees the law but sees it within the context of mass media today. David, many thanks. We'll be right back. We'll be right back to the Roger Stone Show. Whatever you do, please don't go away.
Thanks for listening to The Roger Stone Show. You can hear The Roger Stone Show Sunday afternoons at 3. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?
Every week, the Payne family cuts straight to the real financial story.
The one question, Bob, everyone's asking is, are we in an artificial intelligence bubble? You've been through boom and bust. What do you think?
No hype, no myths. Just what actually matters to your money.
Does feel very similar to what we experienced in the 90s. Where are we, though? Are we in 1995, 1997, 1999?
Listen to the Pain Points of Wealth on the Red Apple Podcast Network.